not to get crass, but the worst part of it,
Yeah.
one of the
Tell
worst
me.
parts of it,
Yeah. Yes.
the bathroom situation.
Well, you got to take a poop with other people again.
Yes. Welcome to Backtracking, the show where two old friends take a second listen to influential bands' catalogs track by track. I am J. William Hall.
And I'm Dan Fiden. We'll be taking this journey together, providing context both historical and personal on some legendary bands. For our second season, we've picked none other than pioneering indie rockers, American Music Club.
Today on Backtracking, relax, my love, it's just the gates of hell swinging open. That's right, you handsome devils. It is time to tackle Mark Eitzel's solo studio debut, 1996's 60-watt Silver Lining. So tell me, Dan, are you ready to have a drink at the Mission Rock?
I sure am, JW. We can watch the Oakland lights across the dry dock. But the first order of business has to be the telling of the sad tale of the dissolution of our heroes, American Music Club. So grab yourself a stool and pull up a drink. We left our story off with the completion of San Francisco, a painful process that left the band unhappy and without multi-instrumentalist Bruce Caffin, who quit AMC before the album was released. Nonetheless, the album was released, and it received similar critical praise to each of the band's last few records. Wish the World Away was the lead single, as solid a shot as they'd yet taken at a mainstream rock anthem. Unfortunately, the shot didn't quite land. Radio airplay wasn't forthcoming, and San Francisco sales peaked at 72 in the UK and didn't chart at all in the US. But contracts were contracts, and debts were debts, and so the band had no choice but to satisfy the touring commitments management had made. Their biggest question was how to play the band's increasingly intricate music live as a four-piece without Bruce Caffin. The answer was to rock, and rock hard. Eitzel moved on to electric guitar, and songs like Bad Liquor became an increasingly large part of the set. It was a logical choice that Voodie enjoyed, but Babe, not Eitzel or the crowds. By this time, AMC fans expected to hear Eitzel and the band in a quiet, emotive mode, but the shift back to an earlier approach also brought with it Eitzel's more confrontational punk demeanor, and the fans were not pleased.
And neither was the band. Eitzel's electric guitar playing was erratic, and the hard-rocking approach was not making anyone happy. It was bad enough that Danny Pearson threatened to quit during the tour. The tour finally concluded with a show at Slim's in San Francisco, a show that would become the band's last for a long time. They were left with a debt of $1.5 million to the labels, plus additional fees to management for their share of the San Francisco tour income, and without a label in Europe, as they'd been dropped by Virgin. Eitzel had had enough. He fired management, resulting in further payouts and legal fees, and called a band meeting. He told Tim, Danny, and Voodie that he would only continue if they'd agree to give him full control of the band. None of the guys were happy, but they were open to it if it meant salvaging the project they'd invested so much into already. But Eitzel, perhaps recognizing this change would just forestall the inevitable, changed his mind and quit American Music Club. Eitzel spent 1995 in San Francisco writing and working on unwinding the band's label commitments. Warner Reprise held Eitzel's solo rights as well, but he was able to convince them to allow him to move to the company's Warner Brothers imprint and leave the band's debt with Reprise. He also was re-signed to Virgin as a solo artist. After some touring as an opener for Bob Mould and an abortive collaboration with Everything But the Girl, Eitzel assembled a band to record a new album. The personnel were not unfamiliar. Bruce Caffin became Eitzel's primary collaborator, and Danny Pearson returned to play. The only new faces were disposable heroes of Hypocrisy drummer Simone White and hired gun Mark Isham on trumpet. The album's release in early 1996 was a fresh start for Eitzel.
So what else was starting fresh in 1996? The element Copernicium is added to the periodic table for the first time, and the first Pokemon games are released. Osama bin Laden's first written declaration starts his jihad against the U.S., and Dolly the sheep starts her life semi-fresh after she's the first mammal to be successfully cloned. J. William Hall,
Yeah.
someone who can never be cloned, who can never be replicated because he is an original. How's it going, J. William?
You know, we're hanging in there. We're hanging tough, as they used to say. The New Kids on the Block used to say, we're hanging tough.
That is what they used to say. And I have to say to you, by way of catching up, I was in Las Vegas at the Sphere seeing Dead and Company. Grateful Dead, not a band that's at the top of my list of favorites, but an amazing show nonetheless. However, this is not about the Grateful Dead. This is about New Kids on the Block. I happen to see on the calendar for the Sphere, New Kids on the Block will be appearing there in early 2026. It may be finally our opportunity to backtrack the NKOTB catalog season 4. What do you say?
I'm open to it in concept, but not in reality.
If you had to guess, just off the top of your head, how many albums did New Kids on the Block release?
I'd go with 5, but I
You
know
think
that they've done some, like, didn't they like reunite and do a new they've done a little bit of that, haven't they?
Oh, did they? Oh, I didn't know that. It's entirely possible.
Unless it was just tours, I don't know. Are they the AMC of boy bands? They had their first period, and they put out so many albums, and then they take a break, and then they do some solo stuff, and then they have a second period.
I think that's a stretch. That's a stretch comparison, if I'm being honest. But I think the most confounding thing about New Kids on the Block and them performing in 2026 at the Sphere is, I could be wrong, but my instinct is that they're, not massively older than us, but they're a little bit older than us, right?
A little bit.
So how do we feel about a band in their, very late 50s, early 60s performing as New Kids on the Block? That just seems on its face
Well, I think that the branding now is more NKTOB or NKOTB.
So they're trying to get away from the literal, and they're just trying to go with
I don't think they're trying to pass themselves off as teenagers at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of like, remember the band WASP?
No.
WASP, big hair metal band in kind of the early 80s, but a very dark hair metal band. Kind of, if you remember when Motley Crue kind of went through their, vaguely Satanist iconography.
Little goth.
Yeah, little goth. I mean, it was a very light goth. It was kind of a Spencer Gifts goth, if you know what I mean. But WASP was a bit like that, and there was a rumor, I don't know if this is true, but there was when they wrote out WASP, W-A-S-P, there was always a rumor that I remember when I was a kid that stood for We Are Satan's People.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Those types of rumors that would emerge around different bands or whatever, like this is all pre-internet stuff. This was like that was like a marketing technique almost for them.
You know what, the other one, that much more famous example of that at least in the greater Buffalo area was a I think an oft repeated rumor was that AC/DC stood for After Christ Devil Conquers. I
heard that one as well growing up. So I think that was a wider spread one.
But and kind of like in the face of all obvious evidence, right? I mean, of course it means alternating current, direct current. The logo itself has a lightning bolt down the middle. I mean, there's nothing about that band that would indicate there was any kind of deep Satanist.
Well, I think this was the difference between like our generation, like say Gen X, is coming up, and we're starting to listen to these different kind of genres, and things are they're always pushing the edge further and further and further. And so like our parents were worried about, what was happening to this generation coming up, and were they being led down, these bad paths, and they didn't have the the personal experience to understand stuff that was like more tongue in cheek, you know, or about like some of these bands, you know, like Kiss or I don't know, you know, like they couldn't understand why that would be appealing to young people who don't plan to become Satanists. You know, as they're listening to this, and what does that even mean? You know, like I don't know. But I think that's a phenomenon that's feels like it's lost to time now. Is there a modern equivalent to that?
It's a really great question, actually, and I suspect there is, but I would be wading way too deep to offer a suggestion. You know, I just don't know.
You know, as a parent of you know, teenagers and young adults now, I don't remember there being something that I was so deeply worried, you know, maybe except for like this fucking, you know, manosphere, stuff, you know, like, you know, but in terms of music, I guess, like I haven't been, you know, like, I mean, my kids, you know, listen to stuff that's got plenty of swear words in it. But I'm not shocked if an album gets a parental advisory sticker. You know,
well, I mean, where do they put the sticker now? There's nothing to put the sticker on.
It's true. I mean, I think on the streamers you'll see like they might have like a little E like next to it. It's like explicit. You know, this song contains swear words. But that was a much bigger deal, you know, for us growing up.
It's true.
Like, you know, it's whole Tipper Gore and the Parents Advisory Council and all that, and
Tipper Gore.
We're going to put stickers. But what wound up happening was those albums, those first, you know, so many years of albums, if they got the sticker, man, that album was so cool.
I mean, you know, and I feel like honestly feel like the earliest kind of gangster rap albums really probably benefited substantially from the brouhaha and the application of those stickers, right? Like those NWA albums and things. I think there was probably Slayer probably benefited a bit from that, although I would also say many bangers in the Slayer catalog.
I don't know Slayer. I cannot do a deep dive with you on that.
Really? Yeah. Oh gosh.
Hair metal was not, you know, like
metal
in not hair metal, even just regular metal was not my jam. You know, I was like I liked wimpy British strummy
and
guitar
I'm
band.
Sitting in my tub, I'm so sad.
Exactly. I love that stuff.
Yeah. God, have you been speaking of that stuff? Have you followed any of the back and forth between Johnny Marr and Morrissey and
of course,
last few months?
Must read news. Yes,
it definitely is. It definitely is. Okay, so listen, why don't we get down to the topic at hand? Also, must read news. The new episode of Backtracking coming out. Right. We have now moved on, Jay William, into the post-American Music Club world of Mark Eitzel solo. Now, small asterisk, of course, there was one reunion album. It was only one album, right? One reunion album.
There's more than one. I think there's two.
Oh, gosh. 2 reunion albums. Well, I look forward to those. I know. So the next proper American Music Club album we'll be covering is Love Songs for Patriots. For Patriots, I think that does not come along until 2002, 2003.
Right.
And then there's, I guess, one after that, which I don't know at all. But
the Golden Age.
The Golden Age. Heard good things about the Golden Age, and I'm looking forward to covering it here. But for now, we are going to be, for the next few albums, we're going to be in Mark Eitzel solo land. This is the first of his, what I'm going to say, proper solo albums. Again, asterisk. Of course, we have Songs of Love live, but you know, live, kind of a live album, or mostly
not a studio
live album.
This is a full studio album solo.
Full studio album solo. Now, a little bit of the basics here. Before we get to the basics, housekeeping. Not a lot of housekeeping this week. Just one bit of housekeeping. We took a break last week. We may be taking a few breaks over the course of the remainder of the spring, mostly to give us time to get through all of these later solo albums. We're going to generally cover the Eitzel solo albums in a single episode rather than 2 episodes, which we do for the American Music Club albums. We feel like that's an appropriate way to kind of cover the kind of entire body of Eitzel's work, but leaving our focus on American Music Club, which is the stated goal of the season. So we'll try to make announcements when that's happened. But we appreciate you guys tuning back in after a week off for us. All right, Jay William, the basics. This album was released March 19th, 1996. Where were you in March of 96?
I was in London, England, Neasden, to be exact. Yes, that was sort of my waning days of my little sojourn over there, and I was getting ready to come back to the U.S. and move to Chicago.
Now, do you think in March of 96 you knew that you were going to be doing that, or did you not yet know?
I did not yet know I was going to go to Chicago. I knew I was coming back, about a month or so later, but because of just where I was in my life and stuff at that time, I don't know that I was totally, I did not hear this album at that time.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I was back and,
Yeah. So I was finishing up my junior year of college, also going to be headed to Chicago for that summer. But I definitely did pay attention to this album when it came out. And I really have a soft spot for this album. I think overall this is a terrific album. We'll get into it, obviously. But this has long been an album that I'll kind of go back to. Frankly, somewhat more frequently than some of the AMC albums. It'll be interesting when we kind of get through the entire season to see if my perspective on it has changed. But, I probably just because of, what was going on in my life at the time, I definitely remember this album pretty well and have a soft spot for it.
I was just going to say the one thing that I have to say up front for myself is that this was kind of the point where I lost touch a little bit with what was going on. I wasn't listening to this album. So, upon backtracking, these were sort of re-exposing myself to it. It was almost like for the first time. So, my commentary going forward must be understood to be coming from somebody who has just listened to the album almost for the first time. Versus, I've been living with this album for 30 years, Yeah. More or less that's true for me, but I would say that the first album that I really feel that way about is the next one we'll be covering, which I think is Caught in a Trap, but I can't back out because I Love You Too Much, Baby. Well, we got the Peter Buck album in there.
Yeah, but I think that comes after Caught in a Trap. Is that wrong?
Does it?
Well, all right. We'll do some deep research and we'll figure out the exact chronology. But I will say for sure the Peter Buck album was my departure point. My and I have not listened to West in many, many years, but my recollection is that was not a favorite of mine, and I kind of lost track of things after that. But this one absolutely was a favorite of mine, and I have listened to this album countless times. Putting it back on to backtrack it was like visiting an old friend.
Well, that should be a good conversation then. Let's get into it.
All right, so it is 54 minutes and 2 seconds. Why don't we talk about the cover art? This cover art, beautiful sepia tone snapshot of a fishing boat, presumably in the old San Francisco Bay. Photo taken by one Mr. Mark Eitzel.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, the cover photo is a Mark Eitzel photograph. So, Jay William, how do you feel about this one?
I like it. I think it's a really cool image. I would have guessed that it was like some old photo, you know, like from
Yeah.
yesteryear. And I like the, you know, just the font and the treatment of it. Now, in terms of how it matches the mood of the record,
Yeah.
like I don't like it as much as some of the AMC album covers.
Really?
I guess
Okay.
in that way, but I like it as an image and as an album cover, and you know, I think it does fit like somewhat.
Yeah. I think I understand what you're saying. I love this cover. I really love kind of everything about the graphical, you know, the layout, everything about how this album is put together aesthetically. It feels warm, worn, and weathered, like old leather, tobacco stained bar tops, right? It which I think is very evocative of this very Chet Baker kind of vibe of the album, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No,
you know,
I'm glad that you mentioned Chet Baker, because that does sort of like encompass some of. I wasn't able to succinctly pick what I was thinking, but the thing, I'm looking at this album cover a little closer here, and like the boat that's in the image, it looks like a derelict boat, right? Like it's like dead in the water.
Oh, I'm not you know, I don't know that. I don't know if it's dead in the water. I thought that was a functional fishing boat, like maybe a crab boat, but
well, I guess the way
I'm no pescadero.
I mean, I am not seaworthy myself, but like I'm looking at it and it looks almost like, you know, there's no sails or anything up. And it looks like it's like leaning sideways a little bit, or just like a little bit off. Like I could be, I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
Now listen, I am going to say that this is a seaworthy vessel. That there are no sails because this is a modern fishing boat that, you know, uses a motor. I'm guessing that this is like a crab boat. Those cranes are to pull out crab traps. Perhaps listen, I could be totally wrong about this, but as anyone who's watched The Deadliest Catch on Discovery Channel knows, this is a somewhat similar boat to those.
Okay, you recognize this as some specific kind of boat. I choose to view it as a ghost vessel that's been abandoned and is just adrift in the ocean.
Well, I guess there are no right answers in art, but there are wrong answers, and that is one of them. Now,
fair enough.
Going back to the Chet Baker thing, I will say that the album, we're going to get into the kind of overall, the production, the arrangements, the vibe of the album in a second. But as it relates to the cover, I could not help but, within the context of that feel of this album, which I think is pretty kind of consistent across the entire album, think of the covers of the early Spain albums, which we've talked about now a couple of times. Now, Spain, I think, had a very similar vibe, actually. Bit more slowcore, I would say, but it definitely had a loungy, jazzy tinge, a bit of a jazz trio feel almost.
We're talking like 1950s, early 1960s jazz album.
Yeah, smoky, right? Like a very smooth. And the Spain, the first Spain album, The Blue Moods of Spain, and the second, which was called She Haunts My Dreams.
She Haunts My Dreams. Yeah.
Yeah, She Haunts My Dreams. Both had albums that I think, even in the graphical treatment, were very much a intentionally retro. They were the way the text was put on them. They were intended to look like kind of a jazz trio, Chet Bakery album from that era, is my recollection. Which frankly I feel like is a bit too on the nose and now feels somewhat dated to me. Whereas I don't think the Eitzel cover and this treatment feels dated at all. I think it works as well today as it did then. My opinion.
Yeah, it's all down to the font. You know, like they picked this very modern sans serif kind of thing with the circle around the 60, and it's like that would work today. You know, that is not, you don't look at it and think like, oh, that looks like it's from the 1950s, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so should we move on to the overall kind of feel? The producer of this album, listed producer, Mark Eitzel.
Yeah.
First self-produced studio album. He does include in here, I think he includes as like a helper or something, Mark Needham. Now, did you do any digging into Mark Needham at all?
I did do a little digging into him. I found that he worked on a couple of subsequent Mark Eitzel albums. He seems like he's kind of an engineer, so he was helping with the engineering of the album. But later in his credits that I found, he worked on like The Killers, Imagine Dragons, like some bands that were huge, you know. So he's had a career in the industry, and he clearly knows his stuff.
Yeah, but I did note that. I thought that was interesting. What I also thought was kind of interesting, though, especially in light of the kind of retro feel here, is he worked on most of the Chris Isaak albums from prior to this and later, right?
Okay.
So he was around in the Chris Isaak orbit for a long time. He also worked on a number of the Red House Painters albums in and around this time.
Okay.
So, you know, it may have been that he was a San Francisco-based person, and that's why he was involved in all three of these. But I did think it was interesting, and I think the Chris Isaak thing in particular kind of struck me. You know, who knows whether that was kind of circumstantial, but obviously Chris Isaak, very much a retro kind of a
his
musician in some
aesthetic,
ways.
his vibe, everything. Yeah, real clean, dry, or not dry. I mean, there's obviously lots of reverb, but like very clear recordings. Like, you know, it's not like lo-fi, like noisy, you know, mushy kind of stuff.
Yeah. So what I love about the kind of sound of this album is it is incredibly stripped down. It is lean and light. I mean, it really does not feel heavily rehearsed. My sense from the book is that it probably was not heavily rehearsed. And I think in certain spots, maybe, you know, it feels to me like, you know, maybe they could have worked on the arrangements a little bit more. But overall, I love the spontaneity of it. It really does feel like you kind of are hearing many of these songs in a small, smoky bar, basically jazz trio in the corner, playing. You know, I like that. I feel like it's very atmospheric in that way.
Yeah, it has a looseness to it. That, you know, it does feel on different songs there, and we'll talk about it, but like there are parts where I'm a little like, you know, it's unclear if they were kind of improvising, you know, like for sections, or at least like certain players were kind of improvising a little bit, and just it's more about feel than about like structure. Like, here's the structured song or whatever.
Yeah. And I think another thing that's kind of notable about this one is there is not much Mark Eitzel guitar playing on it. I mean, there's not a lot of guitar playing on the album overall, actually. You know, I didn't go through and count all of them, but I would say that close to 50% of the songs have no guitar on them at all. Maybe a little less than that, but I mean, it's substantial.
Definitely piano takes the lead for a lot of these songs. There's definitely a lack of guitar, except for like strummy acoustic kind of parts for the, you know. But yeah, I thought it was interesting because if we get into the players on the album, you know, it's like San Francisco, you know, they record as a 5-piece, and then Bruce Caffin leaves, and then the band splits. But the two AMC guys that come back together with Eitzel are Bruce Caffin and Danny Pearson, and so you've got some familiarity with the AMC sound from them, but then you've got the drummer, Simone White,
Yeah.
who is from a completely different kind of world altogether, like in terms of drum sound, in terms of drum style, you know, and that had to be a conscious choice. And I would love, you know, to know more about how he came to be the drummer on this album. Because that's definitely very different, you know, than the AMC sound. And to me, that is one of the defining characteristics about this album is the sound of his drums versus AMC style.
Yeah, you know, it's something that came up for me as well. I remember the name Disposable Heroes of Hiphoprisy. I remember that as being a name that people said when I was kind of in college. But I cannot think of, I have no idea what they sound like now, and I didn't go back and try and kind of like look it up. I've looked up Simone White. He does seem like, you know, he's primarily kind of a jazz drummer.
Right.
And
I actually, I dove a little bit, because I did, you know, I had to dive into him as well, and I found this group that he was in around the same time called Afro Mystic. Yeah. And I ended up going and listening to you know, kind of skipping through one of their albums. And I was like, I'm going to add this to my Check It Out playlist. Cause like, it's cool. Like it sort of has like a Herbie Hancock Headhunters kind of vibe. Really? It's jazzy, but spacey. And, you know, so, but I mean, it is not an obvious choice that I would have expected Mark Eitzel to make, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, I think he's based in San Francisco, so maybe they just cross paths somehow. But you know.
Well, you know what? I had a similar thought about the drumming. One of the things that struck me about this exact topic, you know, Caffin and Danny come back to do this album. Tim Mooney does not. He gets a different drummer. Which struck me as strange because it seemed like Eitzel had been trying to get Tim Mooney into the band for so long, right? And things, you know, initially when he was going to try and bring him in, I think it was around Everclear is my recollection. We'd have to go back and look. But he was trying to get him in, and then Tim Mooney, I guess, was having some kind of drug problem, so he couldn't come into the band. But he was like, he wrote a song with Eitzel way back then, and I think he was in the Toiling Midgets at the same time that Eitzel was, and so they had been collaborators for a really long time. And then once Mooney is in American Music Club, one of the things that I said multiple times is how much more bouncy the drums tend to, and like groovy, funky kind of a drum approach than any of the drummers previously. My assumption was, well, that must be what Eitzel wanted, right? If he wanted to work with Mooney for so long, he must have liked that, the way that he approached these Eitzel songs. So then when he goes solo to move on to a different drummer who also is taking a very, I think, generally pretty bouncy, funky approach to it, I don't know. I just feel like there must be a little bit more of a story there, but it definitely struck me as well.
Yeah, and well, you know, as we go through the songs, you know, there are certain songs where I'm a little bit like, is he actually playing like live drums, or is this like a loop?
No, I think this is all. I mean, it sounded all live to me, but point it out when you hear it.
Okay, but yeah, an interesting choice, and I mean, Eitzel was producing, so clearly this is what he wanted, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so the last thing that I'm reluctant to talk about it, but I feel like we do have to talk about it, or we should at least address it. It came up as I was going back and reading a bunch of reviews of this album, including reviews that are written kind of many years after the fact. There is one trope that comes up in a number of the reviews. I think I understand it, but I want to cover it. I want to at least talk about it. And it's something that we haven't really talked about all that much when covering the band overall. So Eitzel and Eitzel's sexuality. The trope about this album that shows up in many of these reviews is this is Eitzel's gay album. They always point to Cleopatra Jones and the first song, which is a cover of Carole King's song, but very famously done by both Carole King, Dusty Springfield, and Barbra Streisand. And so I just wanted to surface it, right? That I don't know all the details. They're not really talked about very much in the Wish the World Away book, and I think when they are discussed, they're discussed pretty ham-handedly. But what we do know from these sources of material is that Eitzel had, some kind of a deep, presumably romantic relationship with Kathleen, but at some point in the late 80s, he comes out as gay. And by the time that this album is recorded, he has been in at least one long-term relationship with a man. And a lot of these reviews are really like, that is the thing about this album. It's Eitzel kind of finally getting comfortable with being gay or something. And you can't see this album as and I have to say, like, that feels like a real fucking stretch to me. I think they're basically putting together a couple of like very small little elements of this album and turning it into a story. They're basically turning it into a story about who they want to kind of describe Eitzel as, if that makes sense. And I was thinking about, like, all right, when did this album come out? There was another album that I think of as it was an album I love, musician that I loved at that time, named Rufus Wainwright. I don't know if you know Rufus Wainwright.
Oh yeah.
His first album came out a couple years after this, and I think of that as like great album, piano singer-songwriter mostly, but a really, really cool album. But I think a more like gay, if there is such a thing, is like a more. It just felt like more of a gay. Yeah. It was that. But I think it's a really strange way to interpret this album. Really, primarily based on this like maybe one song, Cleopatra Jones, but I think it was on AllMusic. This guy's like, oh yeah, this is like clearly about Eitzel like wanting to be like Cleopatra, and I'm just like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? This feels like like so many other songs that he's written over the course of his career that are a snapshot of a person in a bar, right? He writes a lot of those songs, and this is just one more song. I don't quite understand why. I don't know why that became a thing in so many of these reviews. I don't know if that's anything you came across when you were kind of like, digging into this album, but I wanted to tackle it because I feel like we haven't said anything about it. It comes up a lot around this album. And I just wanted to kind of deal with it.
Well, I mean, we're two straight dudes, and so like
we're too straight. Too straight. We are too straight.
I don't know that we're going to coherently be able to cover this, but like there are a couple of songs where it does seem like he's singing to somebody he's romantically entwined with, and I don't know, like, so what? Like, I don't feel like any of these songs are putting that out front exactly, like you can hear them in any way, anybody who's been in any kind of romantic relationship, like you can hear these songs filtered through that, so Eitzel has been pretty open about, or at least I've seen a couple of things where he said, like, I don't know if opportunities arose or whatever, where he could have been or could have gone more in the direction of being very, open out, but he sort of shied away from that a little bit because that's a lot of pressure, to be a spokesperson, and I don't think that I would not have put that at the top line of my review of this album, but maybe those writers had I don't know, they had their own personal relationship with it or whatever.
And I mean, I do understand in some, like, at that time, it was much more unusual, maybe, there were certain musicians that were semi-popular at that time where people really kind of defined them as like that was their thing. Like the Indigo Girls were like, they are like the lesbian folk couple, right? That was really, kind of the shorthand that everyone used to describe him. And I think especially for people kind of looking back at it now, that seems really strange because we just, that isn't something that anybody really thinks about as much anymore. But back then, I do think that was, a little bit more of a categorization that people would make. And in some ways, I can kind of, I guess I could kind of at the time understand people trying to kind of contextualize Eitzel that way. But reviews and things written later about it, I guess for me, looking at the text of the album, that is not something I pick up. But if you go and read reviews of this album, you're and you've never heard it, you would be forgiven thinking that it is much more like Rufus Wainwright's first album than it is this. This does not. I mean, this just sounds like any other kind of,
I
collection of AMC material.
The album that I sort of, I equate this to is, I know I gave you shit a few episodes ago about talking about Sting, the Soul Pages or
great album.
Sting,
great album.
Dream of the Blue Turtles, which was his solo debut album, and he decided like I'm gonna do this jazz thing. Like I'm gonna go deeper in that direction, which is something that couldn't really happen with the Police because just the players involved. Like I want to explore this sound and this thing, and I think Eitzel does that on this album. It's like he's like, I want to go deeper into, and some of it is that Barbra Streisand, torch song, jazzy, more jazzy, more, he's experimenting, he's playing, he's trying different things here. And I think that applies to some of the lyrics, maybe, there are certain explicitly about being a gay man, kind of lyrics that maybe he would have felt like, oh, I shouldn't do this with AMC, but I'm going to do this. This is my solo album. This is my life. And so he's, but again, like, I don't see that as like, this is what the whole album's about, I think like all of these songs can be interpreted in, through any sexuality lens, and appreciated, on all levels, so anyway, I mean, I think
this is not I guess what I would say is this does not feel to me. I think that some of these reviews kind of make it seem like this is Eitzel's album where he comes out. And I do not think that is the case at all. It does not. It's like you said,
overly reductive. It's reductive.
It's irresponsibly reductive. I think it really
simplistic.
Super simplistic. It's a much more interesting album than that, in my opinion. But why don't we, but there are certainly things that, there are decisions that get made on here, and opening with a cover that was famously done by Barbra Streisand is definitely one of them. There's no question that happened. But, why don't we dig into that first? It's the first song on the album. It is There Is No Easy Way Down. It's 3 minutes and 38 seconds. Not written by Mark Eitzel, written by King Coffin.
Carole King.
Songwriting, famous songwriting duo. So why don't we give it a listen?
And your sad eyes reveal just how badly you feel. There is no easy way down.
J. William Hall.
Yeah.
Such a perfectly crafted pop song, as you would expect from a legendary songwriting team like this. What I was hoping we could do, instead of diving deep in the lyrics specifically here, because they're not written by Eitzel, is to first talk about his version of the song versus some other versions of the song.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have an opportunity to listen to any of the other kind of well-known versions of this one?
Of course I did. I went and I listened to Dusty Springfield's. I listened to Barbara Streisand's, just to get a feel for, like, you know, how is he interpreting it? Like, you know, I listened to Carole King's version on her debut solo album. So, yeah, you know, like, I mean, it's very much in line, I would say, with those versions. The approach is similar.
It is. It was surprisingly true to all of. I was surprised at how consistent all of the versions were, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the way the song is written. You know, I don't know how you would reinterpret that musically. Like, it's got this kind of like light, jazzy, breezy, you know, nostalgic, reflective kind of vibe to it. Very soulful, you know, like, this is a showcase for a vocalist. This is a singer showcase. And there were certainly AMC songs, especially on some of the later albums where, you know, I've Been a Mess or whatever, where Eitzel gets to kind of showcase the vocal performance. And I think that's what this song really, you know, supports.
Yeah. You know, in the book, in the Sean Body book, it's my recollection that Eitzel says that he was most inspired by the Dusty Springfield version of this song.
Yeah,
now, when I listened to all three of them, I actually felt like his version was most similar to the original Carole King version. Or I don't know if that was the first one recorded, but it was the one recorded by the songwriter.
I think Dusty Springfield's may have come first.
Okay.
Or at least the first famous version of it. And Carole King's was a couple years later when she started recording herself. You know, prior to that, she was just a songwriter for so many years, you know, had huge hits.
So I felt like hers was, of the three versions, I felt like hers was the most similar to the Eitzel version. It was the most kind of subdued. I think the Dusty Springfield one was quite gospel inflected.
Yeah, definitely.
And I feel like the Barbra Streisand one was perhaps predictably like kind of Broadway dramatic. You know what I mean? It was very like, it was the most overwrought, very showy, I guess I'd say. Yeah, exactly. So I guess maybe the next question is, why pick this song to open the album?
Yeah, that's the thing that I've kind of thought about too. You know, if you read the lyrics, which are great lyrics, you know, and they're talking about, you know, basically like you've reached this great height. And now it's time to kind of like come down, and there's no easy way to get back down, you know? And, and I don't know if, you know, is this a commentary on like the arc of AMC or something? Is this, you know, it's just a really well-crafted, you know, lyric and song. Singer showcase. It introduces this sort of like jazzy, you know, late nightclub, you know, kind of mood. It also is familiar in a way because it sounds, you know, of akin to like Why Won't You Stay and Fearless, Gratitude Walks, starting the album with this kind of subdued, you know, where the vocal is really important. And you know, I will admit that like I was initially kind of like, what? Like, you know, he starts the album with a cover, like what? You know, like, because he's such a great songwriter unto himself. Why would you put somebody else's song first? But it has a pretty good like opening, you know, it does sort of encompass the mood of the album in a way, or sets the mood, I guess.
Yeah. My first reaction in the selection of this song was that this was kind of a statement about the end of AMC. I don't know that that's true at all. And as I went through the rest of the album a few times, I came to think about an arc of this album that's a little bit different. Also influenced again by what's written in the Sean Body book. So in the Sean Body book, they don't talk about too many specifics, but he does say that around the time that AMC is breaking up, Eitzel's dealing with the firing of the management of the band, all that. He also is breaking up with a fairly long-term partner. We can talk about it more, but I feel like this album has a bit of an arc, a relationship arc. And this is almost like a preamble, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like I've broken up with the last person, and this is where I'm starting at in this.
No, it's almost a little bit like I'm about to tell you the story of a relationship. The starting from the highs, going down to the lows, and I'm using this kind of cover as a way to explain that that's what I'm going into. Again, okay. I may be over-engineering this. I may be making it into like a concept album when it's not. There are clearly songs that do not fit in that framework. But I did start to think about it that way. And if that is something that, if that were what Eitzel was going for, I think it would kind of, in some ways, kind of make sense, right? It would float above the rest of the material on the album and serve as a little bit of a preamble, I guess.
That makes sense to me.
But do you want to talk about get into the music a little bit more specifically? I loved to hear Quittin on the piano here. I love Danny Pearson on the upright bass. I think it's beautiful. He does a terrific job. But Quittin on the piano, simple playing. It's not showy piano playing, but it is so tasteful, like really a lot like his pedal steel, like just the right color at the right time, does what it needs to do. Sometimes he takes kind of an interesting angle on it, but really I think what works so well about Quittin vis-a-vis Eitzel is he seems to intuitively understand where he needs to be within the arrangement of the song. He really needs to everything needs to fit around what Eitzel's doing, right? He really is in this album on the piano doing the orchestra thing that I talked about in, Everclear, for example. Really feels like in this, it's a different kind of, composition of instruments, but they're totally supportive of the emotional moments that Eitzel's hitting in the vocals.
I agree. Like his playing, he's listening to Eitzel's performance and he's reacting to it, but he's also providing the foundation, the scaffolding for the song, and adding some little touches here and there, but nothing too showy, and in a way, because the thing that I thought about a lot listening to this album was what separates this from an AMC album. And, the big absence is Voodie, like the guitar, and he brings this sort of like really edgy, arty, discordant, but I mean, we talked about how his playing was very tasteful too, but it was always in this kind of edgy, discordant sort of like left field way. And Quittin's playing on the piano it's more conventional, it's more kind of like, this is what you expect a little bit. Even so, I think, he's not like, Wynton Marsalis or, whoever on the piano that's this prodigy kind of thing. Like he's doing simple, carefully placed lines and things. And because he's not some kind of, crazy jazz pianist, he's making choices that are more interesting because they're not like uber professional or whatever, like professional jazz pianist, like so it's sort of jazz-ish, I guess. Whereas on like, again, comparing it to Dream of the Blue Turtles, Sting went out and hired these like major jazz guys, and so their playing is like, it sounds like, contemporary jazz, and whereas this is a little more space, a little less showy, but kind of interesting because of that. Yeah. Jazz inflected, not jazz.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. I would say one other difference. I mean, Voodoo is clearly a difference. And a big difference, but I don't. One thing is, I don't think that any of this album has a sense of foreboding that I think comes up repeatedly in AMC albums. The other thing this album has none of is like drive. None of the songs have any drive, and I don't mean that in a bad way. All of these songs they go from sauntering to meandering, but they're never really.
Rock. They do not.
No,
rock.
they don't. No, they don't rock. Now there are some bouncy songs. There's some upbeat songs. We're gonna get to one next, "Sacred Heart." It's definitely an upbeat, bouncy, and I'd say that that's like a sauntering song, right? But it doesn't have that drive that a lot of AMC songs have, actually.
Yeah, and that's what separates this album. Different feel.
All right, so should we move on to that sauntering "Sacred Heart"?
Yes.
Okay, 3 minutes and 53 seconds. Let's go.
I'm out walking on Saturday morning without a direction. I'm a dime a dozen, a worthless tourist, a walking target.
All right, Jay William. Lyrics first. I think this is a very, very sweet, very literal description of a vacation in Paris with a romantic partner at kind of the beginning of a relationship. And I think it's a very, very sweet song across the board. It's not without some melancholy in there or a sense of, there's definitely that characteristic kind of Eitzlerian, I think that I'm going to be, comes to that kind of like, I'm always alone thing at the end. But I think that those lines within the context of this song are more an internal monologue of him fearing that maybe what he's experiencing in real life at the moment of this time in Paris is not going to be there forever. But it's clear to me, at least in these lyrics, that at that moment, he's very happy with this person.
See, I was unclear, I was like, did they break up or did they have a fight or something? And he's roaming around the city and he's seeing, this is the city of love, and he's seeing all of these people everywhere who are in love, and, and he's kind of feeling, bummed out or whatever because he had a fight with his lover. Like, because of the way it builds to the "I'm always alone" refrain, like that was sort of the story that I concocted in my head, kind of looking at the lyrics and stuff. But hey,
all right, I can definitely see it that way. But there's no question that it's filled with that. I think that this kind of trope comes up in Eitzel stuff repeatedly. His description of himself as a tourist. In this case, he's specifically actually a tourist in Paris, right? And the feeling of kind of feeling uncomfortable in your own skin, feeling like you don't belong in a place, which a tourist doesn't belong in a place, right? That's like what it means to be a tourist. There's definitely that, but I don't know. For some reason, it could just be the music, but I just felt like this is a overall kind of a positive memory.
Yeah, I mean, I think the music conveys positivity. It feels upbeat. He's got it starts with a very strummy. It actually reminded me of a band that I love, the Trash Can Sinatras. When they have this, at least early, some of their songs, they have this very strummy acoustic guitar kind of thing. And it felt like that was sort of setting the tone, and the drums are this very kind of upbeat, snappy sort of thing. But when I read the lyrics, I mean, classic Eitzel, like, I'm not so sure, like there's clearly somebody that he loves here and he's singing about them, but it's like, are things going sideways or what's going on? Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just the lines that, there are these very sweet lines in here. I don't need to see you. I just need to feel you when we make love. Feel you in the dark, feel you in the future when we make love. Then again, like, here in the city of love, no one wants me here, but I remember the sweet things we did together when we made love. There's like a lot of sweet sentiments here. You know, track me down and I'll give you my pomegranate heart, my throwaway heart. I don't know. I just think that there's like a, yeah, I could definitely see it your way, but I think my read of this was like, this is very much somehow the beginning of this is like a new love, a new relationship, either about to happen or just happening, and a sense of contrast between his feeling out of place in Paris and feeling comfortable with this person. I don't know. I read this as kind of a straight up love song, as straight up a love song as he does.
I will say, like, repeatedly through the song, he talks about, and it's sort of he says, when we make love, and like, he does that like multiple times through the song. And, I remember, like, back when I first heard this album, because I did hear it like not long after it was released back in the 90s, and I think that was like a turnoff for me, like, I was
really?
What is it? Yeah, just it felt like I don't know,
selling out.
Very different vibe. Yeah, it felt like pandering to, like, he's got to write these blatant love songs now or whatever.
It definitely, it moves into more of an adult contemporary feel. I think you could argue.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think the whole album feels adult contemporary. Like, this does not feel like edgy alternative exactly,
Okay, I think there are moments where it feels like that, and I think this is probably one of those moments. I am going to argue, though, that there are some moments on here that are not as, like, rough edgy, but are as, like, kind of inaccessible or somehow dark as some of the darkest AMC.
Oh yeah, there's some dark stuff coming up.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, what about the music? We've gotta talk about that. The drumming again. I think this is really where this is like an undeniably bouncy. You just have this kind of like, I'm walking down the street, bouncing down the street. It is 100% that drum part.
This is more hip hop, like hip hop / pop style drumming, which is this is the first time we've ever heard Eitzel, singing in that kind of like context or whatever. Totally 100% up front. Like, it's not my cup of tea, and so that I think is why, when I first heard this album and it was kind of like, like, it's not my cup of tea, but I think I respect it, because I respect just that, like, he was trying to do something different. He was trying to get a different feel, like, do something that was like separate from AMC. And his voice is so identifiable and so unique.
Yeah.
And, that was, that's always going to be kind of the biggest tie to AMC. But, for my money, like, some of these songs on this album, especially like Sacred Heart and a couple of the later ones where it's that real poppy, upbeat, kind of loopy sounding drums, like the drums don't vary or do a lot of like fills and fancy stuff. It's almost just like lay down a groove and we're going to record over top of that groove. And so that's why, like, I question on a couple of these. I'm like, did the drums, like, were they playing I don't know how they recorded this album. Like, did they all play together or did they just lay down some drums and then, like, kind of go over top of it with overdubs? It almost feels like the drums are just there to lay the groove, but not always kind of support the song in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say that my interpretation of these drums is that a lot of this stuff was very loosely rehearsed, if rehearsed at all. Mm-hmm. Simone White was probably not very familiar with these songs, but maybe they played through stuff once or twice and then they just recorded it. So there's not really like parts written. He's really just kind of like more or less improvising through the song. That's what this felt like to me. I would agree with you. This is not one of my favorite songs on the album, but I do think one thing that's interesting is this is one of the most upbeat songs on the album, but it is still a very sparse song. It doesn't feel sparse. It feels pretty, it doesn't feel like there's too much space in it at all, but there's not a lot going on in it. It's really, there are not a lot of notes being played, I guess is what I'd say. It's mostly drums and Eitzel singing, and then everything else is kind of, they're playing, but they're not playing a lot. There's not a lot happening, and it's interesting to me how full it sounds, how complete it sounds in spite of that, I guess.
Yeah, it's almost like a jam. More
it is almost like a jam.
Than like a constructed, like we're going to rehearse this song and everybody's parts have to be change, for the chorus and change for like this almost feels like it's a jam. And that is something different as well. Like I think that's something that separates this album from AMC where, for the most part, I think AMC was really like carefully constructing these songs and everybody, figuring out their part for each section of the song and running it live however many times, before you record it. And this does feel more kind of like, Simone White, lay down a groove, like,
yeah,
Bruce, here's some chords, like, kind of get something going. And Danny, on the bass, like, yeah, it's more kind of like these extended, jams rather than super constructed songs.
Yeah. I would completely agree with that. I think last thing on the music side that I wanted to kind of mention here is we had a little bit of a discussion in San Francisco about the use of the kind of samples of crowd noise.
Yeah. Like the background sound effects. Yeah. Like, yeah.
Exactly, and in what song was that? When Don Rickles' spotlight turns blue.
Yeah, the audience clapping. Yeah,
yeah, and I think that we disagreed a little bit about it. So shows up here again. There's all this kind of ambient street noise, and I gotta say, I think it works great in this one. I really like it. It's not obtrusive. Somehow it really gives me this like sense of Eitzel kind of bopping down the street in Paris. It's very literal, but like it really does feel that way to me. And I don't know. I think it's interesting use of it. Last comment I want to make here on this song, and this is a through line that I just want to throw out there. Again, second mention of Sting's The Soul Cages in this episode so far. There is consistent water imagery across the lyrics in this album.
Oh, okay.
First time they show up, and a lot of drowning, a lot of like ocean rising, water rising, drowning, whatever. But first time it shows up is in here. There's a little Noah line that you might have caught, and the street's long since flooded, all that. So minor mention of it, but it does show up, and there's much more of it later. So something to pay attention to.
The Noah line, and Eitzel kind of dabbles in biblical kind of imagery here and there.
Yeah,
and he says, "Up in heaven, do we make them burn up, or do they ignore us? Bigger fish to fry." I like that. I like that couplet, like because it's got this kind of biblical kind of thing, but then bigger fish to fry. It's just sort of this, colloquial kind of expression or whatever.
All right. Well, it's time to move on from Sacred Heart, I think. Okay, so always turn away 4 minutes and 26 seconds. Why don't we just listen to the song?
Always turning away.
Okay, Jay William, another water theme, another water metaphor. What do you think about these lyrics?
I like, these are very poetic lyrics overall. Like,
Yes.
You can tell
Yes.
that like he took time to kind of, really craft these lines. I especially, it sort of reminds me a little bit of some of the latter era AMC where, the verses are these very kind of poetic, like, a little more dense, kind of trying to figure out stuff. And then there's a very clear, chorus, in this case, always turn away.
Yeah.
That kind of brings it all together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it really is a collection of really beautiful, nice, lovely imagery that roughly kind of describes the ebb and flow of a tide. I mean, I guess you could probably say that this is a metaphor for the ebb and flow of love, though I don't think there's really much direct evidence of that. But he definitely has this kind of consistent and very lovely tidal kind of feel in here. And I thought it was especially nice when he talks about the pearl accordion, which I feel like was a kind of a nice way to kind of, again, reinforce that almost breathing feeling that you imagine a tidal flow has.
I think you're right. I think it is just about like, the tides of love, the ebb and flow, or just of life in general, like good times, bad times, coming and going.
Yeah, it's true.
But it's done in a very poetic way. It's very, it's not like beat you over the head with a message kind of thing. I like it. I really like the lyrics. I have some. Well, okay. So
what about the music?
When this initially starts, like I'm drawn, or I'm thinking of like 70s, almost yacht rock, kind of like style stuff. And there's one specific song that I'm driving myself crazy trying to remember what this song is, but I can hear the melody in my head. And I actually, just minutes before we got on, I was trying to Shazam me humming this melody and to see if it would recognize it. And of course, I don't think I did a good job of humming it, but there's a specific song from the 70s that I know is like it's like an easy listening, like slightly jazzy, yacht rock, soft rock kind of thing. Do you want me to sing it for you?
I do. Yeah, I mean, you've built it up so much. I feel like this is your moment to shine.
Okay, here it goes. Listeners, if you can identify it, it's like, oh, da, 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 da. Do you know that one? Yeah.
Wow, that was terrible. I have no idea what that was. Now is that the vocal line that you're singing, or is that
or something like that? Yeah, see, that's it.
We are going to be able to go away and find that. It is. I want to say it's Eric Carmen, but it's not Eric Carmen. It is definitely a song that will appear on a yacht rock mix if you look for it. But I know exactly the song that you're talking about.
The song,
can't think of the name of it.
The atmosphere and the vibe of that song is what immediately I felt upon hearing like the opening of this song.
Oh. Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you there. I do know the song that you're talking about. My interpretation of that song that you're talking about, which I wish we could remember the name of, is it's a bit more high drama. This, again, I think that what's interesting about the first Eitzel song on here, Sacred Heart, and this song is they have a very tossed off kind of quality. It doesn't feel like there's a lot invested in the performance,
right,
or the arrangement of the song. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It just really feels very live. I mean, it feels very much like, I guess for me, the first thing that struck me about the music in this one is, gotta say it, it's such an interesting tight snare sound, like probably mostly a drummer thing, but I think it's pretty interesting, and I like this sound. And I think it's characteristic in this song because it's so remarkable here again how little there is driving this song forward other than the drums, right? I mean, it's almost like a duet between Eitzel and the drums. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's really the most kind of
that's what made me question, like, because I had the same note that, like, the drums don't really change, like, throughout. Like, they're just laying a groove, and there's no cymbal hits, like, when they go to the chorus or any fills or anything like that. It's just this, like, straight groove. And that makes me wonder, like, how did they record this album? You know, did Simone White come in and Eitzel was like, I just want you to lay down a groove, like kind of like this, and he just did it for a few minutes, and then they were like, okay, and then they built on that, or what? Because it doesn't sound like the drummer knows the song. You know, like he's just laying down a groove, and I feel like that happens on several songs on this album. I definitely took note of that.
Yeah, I would agree with you on this song in particular. I think another thing that strikes me as a little bit odd, it's interesting, but it's odd, is the instrumentation during what I'm going to call the chorus. They have this very weird kind of like slide on the bass. What is that called? Is that a glissando? I don't know what that's called, but you know what I mean. He's kind of like
he's playing a fretless. It sounds like a fretless bass.
Yeah, I think on the whole album he's playing an upright bass, and I think they're all fretless, right? But he does this like slide on it, you know, in this, and there are these kind of weird piano arpeggios in that same section.
In the chorus,
It's interesting, but it feels a little, I don't know, weird to me.
See, I actually liked it. Like I I think the thing for me that's not, I don't want to say lacking, but it's just different than the AMC albums is, you know, this album sound-wise and performance-wise, these performances are more conventional than AMC. You know, like all of the instrumentation and stuff fits a vibe. There isn't something unusual necessarily kind of poking through. And so these moments where something kind of a little trippy or a little something happens, like, and I feel like those piano arpeggios during the chorus, like that felt a little more psychedelic almost. And I was like, I like that, you know, as kind of like something that doesn't sound as straightforward, you know?
Yeah. Well, then maybe you also like that bridge with where the acoustic comes in, the acoustic guitar comes in as well. I mean, that also kind of struck me as a little strange in this one.
Yeah, you know, like any choice that they made instrument wise that was a little not like a smoky jazz nightclub, I think I appreciated more, you know, because a whole album of that smoky jazz nightclub vibe, I don't know that I want to hear a whole album of that necessarily, you know, like, and so I liked the little kind of unusual production touches that happened here and there. But this is another one, and I brought this up on one of the last albums for AMC. You know who would be great covering this song?
This song. Okay, go ahead.
Sade, come on. Like this would, you know, can't you picture it? Can't you see, you hear, you know?
I can hear her doing a number of Eitzel songs. This is not the song that I would pick for her.
Well, you're wrong. This is where I say you're wrong.
Well, maybe. Well, only one of us here is a producer for Sade.
Who's been a producer for Sade? Did I do it?
All right. So is there anything else to be said about Always Turn Away? I'm kind of flying through this one, honestly, Jay William, because I think that this is I think it's a strange choice for the third track on the album. I think it's a little bit of an oddball here. I have a tough time with this one.
Yeah, I actually kind of like this one. All in all, in spite of what I may have said in the last few minutes, like this one, I thought like, yeah, I kind of got into this one, like listening to it, you know.
All right, well, that's good. I mean, listen, that's why we do it. But track 3 is a flat 5 minutes, and it's called Saved.
Track 4.
I'm sorry, track 4. You know, I keep on saying track 3. It's because I, in some ways, think about There's No Easy Way Down as kind of a...
Is that a pre-album single?
It's almost like a hidden track at the beginning of the album in my mind.
Nice. Yes.
Right? But yeah, no, I should say it is track 4. It is Saved. 5 minutes. I want to get into it.
Your warm embraces thrill me. In your arms I fall like a star.
Okay, is there in the entirety of the catalog that we've covered to date a more pure, unapologetic, no asterisks love song in the Eitzel catalog than Saved?
This would be a strong contender. I agree.
I mean, it really is just like, this is just like a straight up love song. There's no, you're going to leave me any minute. There's no, I'm going to leave you any minute. There's no, you know, Angel, we go down together kind of a vibe here. This is just like, I feel love and I love this person. And I have to say, because it's that, I love the song kind of because it's so fresh for him. This is like way over personalizing this music. This is making the whole thing way too autobiographical. But I read these lyrics, I listen to this song, and I'm rooting for Eitzel.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, you're right. This is a new sort of perspective from him. You know, this isn't doomed love. You know, this is you know, the best thing, the greatest thing in the world is you and being in your arms and, you know, experiencing that love. Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, a big-hearted moment for Eitzel.
Yeah, and it is undeniably like back into this like very Torch songy mode, but I think saying Torch songy, I think kind of plays into this, you know, trope about the album. This is just like a classic crooner song as well, right? I mean, this is really this kind of songwriting. I think this kind of performance, the instrumentation, very, you know, Sinatra, very Billie Holiday, very Chet Baker.
Babs.
I mean,
this
his singing
Babs.
isn't. Oh, I don't think so. You know what I mean?
Hear Barbara Streisand
I don't
singing
think
this song.
Oh, really? I think that this is I can hear that. It has a certain amount of like, you know, moments of powerful singing, but I think it's a bit more, I think it's less Broadway than that. But I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you know, clearly, you know, those big Torch song singing women of the 60s and early 70s had a big impact on Eitzel. You know, I mean, in recent years at this point, you know, AMC recorded covers of a Carpenter song. They recorded a cover of California Dreaming.
Yeah.
there's another one in there that, you know, like, and this album was his opportunity to indulge that, you know, that thing that he loved, you know, and to do, and he has the voice to do it. Like that's the key. It's,
Yeah.
you know, it's not that he, you know, I mean, he pulls these things off in his own way. You know, I think, you know, No Easy Way Down, like famously covered by exclusively women, you know, and then Eitzel does his version of it. And he's got a very, you know, he's a gay man, but you know, he has a very masculine kind of voice. And,
Yeah.
you know, it brings something different to it. And so, yeah, I think that this song is in that tradition. He's kind of trying to write like that style of song. And it works.
I think that in this type of song, unlike the other songs that we've heard that he's written on the album so far, right? Track 2, track 3. I think that the musical approach, this somewhat more, what feels like a looser, more improvisational, just generally lighter touch approach to the arrangement works so much better on this song than it does on Sacred Heart or Always Turn Away. I think it works perfectly here. Like there's just so much space. It's just little, you know, touches, little flourishes, all supporting Eitzel in this vocal performance. I think this is a terrifically strong song on the album. My opinion, this is the first kind of, I'm not going to say knockout song, but I think this is a really, really strong performance on here. I think it's a great recording.
Now, is this the first appearance of the muted trumpet on the album?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about that. So, Mark Isham is, I think you say Isham. I'm not certain.
I think
how
I
you
said
pronounce
Isham,
that.
but I could be wrong. Sorry, Mark.
Isham, you know, as long as you don't call me late to dinner. Isn't that what they say?
Do they? I don't know.
Isn't that call me
Tomato, tomato.
call me whatever you want. Yeah. Anyway, so very well known kind of Hollywood studio musician, composer, arranger guy. I think he's done all kinds of stuff. Very, very well-known person. My recollection, they talk a little bit about the hiring of him in the book.
He must have cost a fortune.
My recollection
he had to have cost a fortune.
Yeah, and that is exactly right. My recollection here is that in the recording of this, Eitzel decided he wanted to have a trumpet player in, and for whatever reason, I think there was a scheduling conflict with somebody, and at the last minute, they just like paid a bunch of money to this guy. He came up and did all the tracks in like a single day. And there was not a lot of direction about what they wanted him to do. They were just like, come in and do your thing, you know? And he came in and he just kind of improvised on all these songs. And after the fact, Eitzel didn't really like his playing on a number of the songs and wanted to re-record the trumpet with somebody else. But I think for whatever reason, I might be getting this story a little bit wrong. I apologize. I should have refreshed myself on the section of the book. But the trumpet didn't go exactly as Eitzel intended, but they ended up using it anyway. And I have to say, I really like the trumpet on this one. I think it works awesome.
I mean, the trumpet sounds very professional, like throughout. It's solid. You know, like it's clear that whoever's playing the trumpet knows what the fuck they're doing. You know, and at the same time, it pulls it into that adult contemporary space. You know,
does.
It's got more of that Windham Hill kind of like vibe, you know, that's sort of like pulling it in that direction.
Yeah.
And so I can see where, like, I appreciate it more now, you know, in my 50s listening to it than I did, you know, in my 20s. Like, you know, like it was very, I think, an off-putting element at that. Yeah,
really?
Just because,
okay.
You know, it's like, I mean, you know, if you're more like, I'm more of a rock fan, you know, and so like hearing this album in my 20s and being kind of like, you know, like this sounds like Windham Hill or, whatever, like those elements, those production touches. Like I couldn't appreciate the skill, of the player or whatever. But I think, I think it is apparent, like when you say about how he just kind of came in. I mean, he must have cost a fortune, because you look at the credits for this guy, he played on all kinds of big time stuff. And, there was probably a very limited budget, and it was like, okay, like you can come in and we've got like 5 hours or whatever to work with you. And he was just like, all right, boom, let me hear the song. Okay. Work out a couple parts. Boom. Here we lay it down. Next one, and they just went like that through the album.
Yeah.
And you can kind of tell in a way, I guess that's the thing about this album that I'm the most on the fence about, like, whereas AMC albums, like I think they had a whole development process for albums and demos, and they kind of worked out their arrangements, and, it was all kind of rehearsed. And it felt like on this album, it was a little more like, drums come in and lay down a groove, and maybe you do that one day and then you leave, and then we come in and we're layering stuff on it, but you never really, it's not like you come back and then revise the part you recorded. And then the trumpet, kind of come in, and you don't really know much about the rest of the context, but just lay something down. Okay, we'll use that, and it feels a little more patchwork, I guess, in that way.
Yeah. I don't know. I get it. This song in particular, I think is very Chet Baker. The vocal performance is not. The vocal performance is a little bit bigger than that, but the way that you can almost, Chet Baker kind of would play the trumpet, right? So he'd sing, and then when he was not singing, he'd maybe, do some lines on the trumpet in some of these songs, and you can almost picture that here. You know what I mean? It feels like dynamic, that interplay between the vocal and the trumpet. I don't know. It is definitely different, and I appreciate that he went in a very different direction right post AMC. I can understand why he would want to do that. I just think that of the songs on this record that he wrote, this is the first one where I feel like it totally coalesces.
There are some really good lyrics in this one. An empty heart is like an empty house filled with old ghosts and little else. That whole verse following that, I thought was really, really good, and unusual. Like, compare those lyrics to something that was out in the pop charts at that time. Like, these lyrics are very different and very, very idiosyncratically Mark Eitzel, but the sound is this more kind of adult contemporary-ish, light jazz sort of feel. So I think if you were an AMC fan that was like a fan of their rowdier moments, or their more arty or rock, or, like those kind of elements of AMC, this is a little bit of it's a big change,
Yeah. All right, so should we move on to Cleopatra Jones? Okay, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Why don't we just dig right into it?
Cleopatra Jones. If they don't see you, then they're blind. Cleopatra Jones. Liquor and love and everything that's kind.
Now, these lyrics definitely paint a picture of a place, which I like. What did you think, J. William Hall?
Well, I first thing I was like, Cleopatra Jones, and I Googled it, and Cleopatra Jones is the title of a lead character of a famous blaxploitation film from the 70s, and it's sort of this ass-kicking female undercover agent. And so I was like, is he singing about the movie, you know? But then like when you read more into the lyrics, and it's like, no, this is a specific person that he's singing about, somebody, you know. I think this is a theme, you know, in Mark Eitzel's writing history, where he is sort of like going to the defense of a vulnerable woman, you know, somebody who the world, society, or in this case, it sounds like it's just people at a bar who are kind of like putting this woman down, and Eitzel saying, wait a second, you know, like, here's something that's beautiful about her, you know. And so this fits in with you know, previous AMC songs that have had that kind of theme to it.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think this is very much like a story of a person at a bar that he thought was cool, and he kind of makes up this whole story about her. I like that it's so. I like that this one is so literal. It's so specific. It's such a moment in time kind of snapshot. But I also think there are a couple of oddball lines in here that feel like they're much more about him than they are about this character. Specifically, people in this bar are all smiles, but that doesn't mean they'll give you the air you need to breathe. When the show's over, they'll take a big part of you when they decide to leave. I feel like that's Eitzel talking about him performing more than this woman specifically and her experience. Do you think I'm off base?
No, I
there?
don't think you're off base. I mean, I think he's seeing, you know, he's relating to her in a way, like, you know, where he's talking about how people take something from him, his energy or whatever, and like, you know, they're doing the same thing to her, you know. And I think that's valid.
I also just think this is an example of Eitzel lyrically, and we've heard it a few different times, right? Going all the way back to gosh, what song was it? It was so funny. Where
Gary's song,
Art of Love. There's a moment like this where he just says something in the lyrics that's so fun. It's just so ridiculous and so out of place within the lyrics from a songwriter like this, or you might think it is, but it just somehow works. You let it go, and it's just funny. The phrase, every time I hear it, she can kung fu just like Hercules, is such a funny lyric, because it's like, you know, obviously it's a joke. I'm going to explain the joke, which is what's going to be the thing that makes it not funny. But it's like Hercules doesn't do kung fu. You know, I love that, like, his willingness to just occasionally in these lyrics, like, throw out this weird shit that's like obviously goofy. Mm-hmm. And I love that. Somehow it makes, I don't know, it adds this other, there's always a risk with Eitzel. And I think he falls into it sometimes, where it's one-dimensionally sad, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's known for his heaviness, but if you really read it line by line, there's a lot of absurdity and just funny little, thrown off kind of lines. But yeah, in this case, I wonder if he was like, you know, I need something that rhymes with leaves evil men on their knees, and, you know, somehow he arrived at Hercules. But yeah, that I didn't notice that. You know, you take for granted. We've backtracked however many albums now, and you start to take for granted some of the more subtle kind of like turns of phrase and stuff. And that, you know.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to point out too is, you know, the thing that grabs your attention near the very beginning of this song, where he's like, you know, the people I was with said you were nothing but a fag hag and a dope fiend.
Yeah.
And I was like, fag hag, I haven't heard that term in a long time, you know, and you know, I think that
yeah, I would imagine that term isn't in circulation anymore. I don't know.
You know, I remember it from back in that era, and, you know, it's definitely provocative, you know, like, and I guess sometimes back then, whenever people would, you know, groups would sing something, you know, that was real, like, you know, provocative in that way. Like I almost had kind of like come on, like you're just trying to be controversial.
You're just trying to get something out of me.
And but I don't read it that way now. Like I read this as really like an affectionate, like he's he's going to he's singing in the defense of people who are on the margins, the margins of society or whatever. And I don't know.
Yeah, I do think though, like we were talking about up front, I think the way that this album sometimes gets characterized, I think like, the use of that phrase, because it's so upfront in this song, I think it's easy to just kind of say like, oh, this is his like, out album or whatever. I just think it's like, it's a dumb take, but I kind of get why people, a lot of people make dumb takes. Not us though.
No,
not
we have no dumb takes. It's all smart.
We are
like, super intelligent.
We are 100% free of dumb takes. I will say though, it feels very much of the era. This song, there was this kind of lounge and 70s like revival happening at that moment. You think of the movie Swingers, you think of like Quentin Tarantino and his kind of Jackie Brown was very much kind of like a homage to blaxploitation movies. It just feels like there was some kind of thing happening, like a lounge revival. Well, it just was right.
The thing that I think of is, and we talked about this. I keep saying Rusted Root as like my shorthand or something for this, but like there was this sort of almost like a beat poet. Kind of like you're at the coffee house and the drummer's laying down the groove and the beat poet's kind of like half rapping over.
No, I got the band. You want to know what the band is? That's perfectly that. Soul Coffee.
Yeah. And it's like slightly jazzy but sort of beat poety, and there's and because of that there's these unusual kind of psychedelic-y sort of images here and there or whatever, and this has that feel to it, which is definitely not a feel that any AMC had, and this is of that era. Soul Coughing, I don't even know who else, but I mean, Simone White, Disposable Heroes of Hip-Hoppersy. Like, I think it was, it was that kind of like upbeat sort of like groove and sort of like rap / melodic chorus kind of thing. This is not the last song on this album that has that sort of feel or approach to it. But the one element on this that I was kind of like, ooh, was Mark Isham. He does this psychedelic trumpet solo over the bridge, and they like spaced it all out and everything. And I was digging that.
Yeah, that's so funny. One of my comments is, I feel like this trumpet solo goes nowhere. So I really like the trumpet work on Saved. In this one, it just kind of felt like, well, we paid for the solo, might as well use it. You know what I mean? But like, this is not one that I really liked particularly.
Yeah, it's definitely more open ended. It's not as like considered. I think he was just winging it. But Eitzel,
I would be really
Oh, I was going to say, Eitzel as producer on this album, there are these moments where he definitely hits the delay pedal, and there's kind of like this, kind of delay going over things, and I noted it there.
So I will say that I feel like this song has not aged particularly well musically. I just don't. I don't think it doesn't feel timeless in the way that I think so many AMC songs and the songwriting itself feels timeless. I'd be very interested to know if this song has kind of survived and still shows up in his solo sets ever. Because when I was going back and reading through all of the reviews that I could, not all of the reviews, but a good number of reviews of this album, this is one of the songs that many of the reviewers pick out as kind of,
and I
that they want to talk about on this album. And
I think it's because of the fag hag.
I don't know.
It's because of the fag hag line. Like it's provocative.
Yeah, I think it might be.
And I think that became an easy hook, for reviewers to catch on to. And, because I do think the sound of this album, because it does have that kind of muted, jazzy, light, smoky, kind of feel to it, the danger that runs is that over the course of an album that becomes background kind of music. And, when you have those moments lyrically where you say something provocative or, something dramatic happens that catches the passive listener's attention, so that's what reviewers grab onto. And I mean, in my research I did around the album too, I saw this song in particular sort of talked about and name checked most often. Yeah. All right, so are we ready to move on to the last song on side A of this album? Oof, what a way to end it. When My Plane Finally Goes Down. 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Let's give it a listen.
And your love is all I have to take with me.
Jay William. William. Have we just listened to the first classic on this album? Wow. To label it a classic, I mean, that's high praise right off the bat. I think that this is one of Eitzel's most. I think this is a song that for me is in the Eitzel pantheon. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful song. Yeah. I love this one. So to talk about the lyrics to begin with, you got to go back to the water imagery. The lyrics in this song are very evocative of will I fall into a cool, cool river or will I fall into a frozen lake from Fearless? Mm-hmm. Okay. I felt ties to Everclear, to Miracle on 8th Street. I thought it sets that kind of vibe. It sounds almost like a sequel song to that or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It definitely feels this song feels a piece of his AMC catalog in a way that I think none of the prior songs on this album have. Agreed. Yeah. So, but lyrically, I just think the lyrics in here are beautiful. I think again, he's back to this chorus with beautiful lyrics that are just easy to kind of remember and sing along with. And your love is all I have to take with me. Just perfect. It's such a beautiful romantic sentiment, doomed but romantic, melancholic. It is Eitzlerian on the nose. I'm going to make a comparison here that I hope doesn't piss anyone off, but this from the title to sort of the concept of the song, it feels Morrissey-esque to me. Okay. Yeah. I'll allow it. I mean, it does have that, if a double-decker bus crashes into us, kind of crashes love, but very romantic, and it's I don't care if I die, I have your love kind of thing. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And of course I will connect it to a song I've mentioned at least one other time in this season of Backtracking. I Will Follow You Into the Dark by Death Cab for Cutie. Which you've said that you don't know. Yeah. Well, but I only know it from your first mention of it, and I believe you. I believe what you're saying. And you haven't added it to the checkout the check playlist? It out playlist. I will. Which album is it? I'll do it. Oh God, which album is it on? I can't remember which album it's on. It's on one of the first 3 albums, I believe. And what was the title of the song again? I Will Follow You Into the Dark. Okay. Okay, so we'll just get that added. So the music on this one, I think, is I think the recording of this one is just perfect. There is a keyboard in here that it sounds like a string-like sample, but it's very kind of wonky, which made me feel like maybe it was a mellotron. But in any case, I think it's a mellotron. Or in any case, I loved it. I love the use of the campfire sound throughout this one. Just overall, subdued, minimal, sparse, atmospheric, such a pretty composition. I think this is a classic.
So here's my question for you. You know, he specifically name checks the Sweet Breezes Blowing Here, Roosevelt Hotel, Hollywood, USA. Like, what is the deal with the Roosevelt Hotel? Like, is that where he is singing this song from?
Don't know. I don't know. I mean, it is a very specific. It is a very specific call out, obviously, and it's a call out that he's made before. He mentions the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood in one other song on Mercury. Is it 4597?
Oh,
Hollywood, where he talks about the Roosevelt.
Does he? I started to look up Roosevelt Hotel and try to figure out if it had like a reputation or if there was something about it that was.
Well, it's the Roosevelt. I have stayed at the Roosevelt.
So it has a sterling reputation.
Obviously, if I was going to stay there, I mean, it must be top notch. No, I mean in those days it was all right. So this is going to be, I'm making this up like from vague memory, but it's a very, very old hotel. So it was around. I mean, it's a very old hotel. It's been there forever. I mean, I'm sure maybe it was built in the 40s or something like that, but it's kind of an old Hollywood hotel. It's more or less across the street from the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, and it's right on the corner of like Hollywood and I don't know what that is. Is it La Cienega? No, a little bit. So, but it's like right there, kind of right in the heart of Hollywood Boulevard where the Walk of Fame is and everything. And my understanding of it is it was like totally glam, the place to be in kind of the 40s and 50s and whatever. And then during like the 70s and 80s and probably the 90s, it was still there, but it was pretty dilapidated. And it wasn't really the place to be anymore. It still had kind of historical significance, but it was a little bit of a shithole. And then more recently, I'm going to say in the 2000s, it was like renovated and it's pretty fancy again. That's my understanding.
It went through a down period.
But it did go through a down period that probably corresponds roughly with, when Eitzel was there. Down period, relatively speaking, right? Like, yeah, I think it was still, it wasn't like a, no-tell, motel kind of like, it wasn't like bad like that, but it just wasn't like the place where every fancy person stayed. But it was very kind of centrally located to like all of the Hollywood stuff. So it's, very close to, pretty close to like the Capitol Records building, for example, and all that kind of stuff.
So it's old world Hollywood, which is something that Eitzel has
Hollywood
kind of, name checked or referred to in previous songs. The Hollywood 4692 and.
Maybe.
I feel like this, well, even talking about Jenna Rollins' hair, like it's this old Hollywood glamour kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think that this song actually, one of the things that's strange about this song on the album is I think it is the first one that doesn't really have that kind of loungy jazz trio Chet Baker feel. This feels very much to me like a classic AMC Mark Eitzel composition and recording. a sparse one, right? Like one of the more sparse recordings, but I feel like this is probably the first song on the album that you could make the argument could plug into, San Francisco, Everclear, Mercury, and it wouldn't feel out of place. Whereas I think the rest of what we had heard so far would feel very strange on any of those albums.
I agree. Yeah, and probably I don't have any notes about the drums on this one. Are there drums or no drums on this?
There are no drums on this one.
Yeah.
No drums. My recollection is this is Eitzel, acoustic guitar, and Mellotron. Yeah. I think there may be some upright bass in there, but I also think there may not be. I don't remember that specifically, but it's a very sparse recording, but beautiful in that way.
And I do like the fire sound effects. Even there were a few points where maybe they're a little distracting, but like I picture him at the Roosevelt Hotel in the presidential suite near the fire.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, see, I've thought of much more of a campfire actually.
No,
but
you're probably right.
Certainly, not having been to the presidential suite in the Roosevelt Hotel.
Oh, you should go
don't
sometime.
Know what that fireplace
it's
sounds
divine.
like. It's a very loud fireplace, though. I understand.
Yes,
can be distractingly
well, it's very
loud.
large. There's a large fire.
Yeah,
there.
sure. Well, sure. But thankfully you have enough kind of like stewards and butlers to carry the very large logs that are required to fuel such an enormous fireplace.
Yeah, you just lounge and they feed you grapes.
Okay, excellent. Well, with that, Jay William, we have completed side A of 60 Watt Silver Lining. Now, I am going to say, we talked about it at the beginning of the episode. We were going to try and do this in a single episode. We thought we could tear through this album quickly. You know what? We're an hour and 50 minutes more or less into this one. We are going to do 2 episodes. I'm calling it now. Next week, we'll be back with side B. So hang on to your goddamn hats. Yeah. Get ready for the last half of this one. We're going to cover it, and then we're going to get into the best and the worst. So, Jay William, why don't you just tell them real quick how they can get in touch with us in the office?
Hey, we're always available. First and foremost, number one mode of communication, electronic mail. You can write to us.
Yeah, email.
Backtracking rocks, ROX, at gmail.com.
Yeah, nobody's manipulating an algorithm to show me which emails I receive. I just get them in the order they're received.
Not yet.
Chronologically,
not yet.
No. I'm not going to let them. If they try to they can pry my email inbox from my cold, dead fingers.
Pretty soon they're going to be sending you AI-generated email. Just random, they're going to scrape everything in your Gmail archive, and then they're going to construct fake emails from AI.
I'm not against it, because let's be honest, the emails that I get, the people who are sending me, they're not as good as they could be. It's got to be better than some of the shit I get. How about if you're going to send us an email, why don't you put a little, put a little back into it?
The quality of emails has dropped precipitously. It's dropped faster than Trump's stock market.
Wow, here he is. He's going to be here all week.
Back in the day when email was a new form of communication, people really embraced it. Our generation, we wrote entire letters. When you wrote an email to somebody, it wasn't just some dashed off, like everything, misspelled, all lowercase, whatever. It was like a formal, like a letter. And, that has been lost. One of the many things that has been lost over the last 20 years or whatever. Social media, nobody writes big, nice, long emails anymore. So by God, listener, if you're going to take the time, put in the effort, write us a nice email, and we'll read it.
Yeah, that's right. You know what? I'll go further than that. I just read an article there on the internet. They were talking about how Gen X is being misunderstood by the younger people,
of course,
in written communication because we use punctuation.
Oh, yeah, that's a problem.
It's like,
problem.
Are you using punctuation? People are going to think that you're being too serious. It's like, hey, how about this? I'm literate.
That's right. I
You know?
actually learned
Why don't you-
phonics. I actually learned how to construct a sentence and deconstruct a sentence. I learned how to fucking write. And if you
At least when I'm fucking communicating with AI, it does punctuation.
It does.
It's not gonna if I use a period, it's not gonna be like, whoa, hold on there, don't get
it's
so
interesting
angry.
to me that AI has been trained in such a way that it would communicate like a Gen Xer, not like millennial, all lowercase, no punctuation, just using letters and numbers in the place of full words. Like, don't get me started.
I'm going to advocate here, and I've been doing it elsewhere for years. New name for Gen X, the second greatest generation.
Oh, I like it.
What do you think about that? What do you
I'm
think about
100%
that?
on
The
board.
second greatest generation.
Yeah, 100%
Yep.
on board.
All right, there it is.
And the thing that
Okay.
makes you great is you don't have to brag about your greatness. It's just understood.
Yeah.
It's
No.
just understood.
No, our generation is so great that we're willing to let the greatest generation retain the greatest generation title.
Whatever.
We'll just call ourselves the second greatest generation.
Whatever. It's cool.
Yeah. Go ahead. You guys were great. We're
Yeah,
great too.
that's an attitude that cannot be found in the younger generations today.
That's right. So if you are of those younger generations, though, and you're afraid of punctuation, go ahead. Message us on Instagram. Our thing is at Backtracking Rocks ROX. On X at Backtracking Rocks ROX. That's it. No more. And then Reddit. Reddit, you can come to Reddit, come to the American Music Club subreddit. We are there. Our username is u/Backtracking Rocks ROX.
And listen, just to be clear, if you are from the younger generation, no offense. from us.
No, I mean
old,
offense.
Crusty Gen Xers, part of the thing about being Gen X is you got to bitch about everything.
Well, listen, I am going to tell you that I've gone to the product management team. We've pulled the numbers. I see you out there. There's some 14 to 19-year-olds listening to this.
Well,
you know what?
Yeah.
And
in the same way that
Just-
grandchildren love their grandparents, maybe the 14 to 19-year-olds will really enjoy the old-timey manner in which we deliver backtracking.
that's right, with punctuation. So that is it for this week. We will be back next week. Side B of 60 Watt Silver Lining. Jay William, as always, thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Bye!